I'll chase you down. I dare you to believe how much I love you now. Don't be afraid, I am your strength. We'll be walking on the water, dancing on the waves. Look up and lift your eyes. The future's open wide. I have great plans for you. Oh yes, your past is dead and gone. Your healing has begun. I'm making all things new. Oh, I'm reaching out. I'll chase you down. I dare you to believe how much I love you now. Don't be afraid, I am your strength. We'll be walking on the water, dancing on the waves. I set every star into blaze so you would remember my name. I made it all for you. You are my masterpiece. You are the reason I sing. This is my song for you. Every star in the sky, I set every star into blaze so you would remember my name. I made it all for you. You are my masterpiece. You are the reason I sing. This is my song for you. I'm reaching out. I chase it down. Come on, I dare you. Just believe how much I love you. Oh, I love you. Don't be afraid. Know that I am your strength. You'll be walking on the water, dancing on the waves. Walking on the water, dancing on the waves.
Well, good morning. I just, man, one of the lines in that song that I love so much is that I've put every star into place that you would remember my name. And man, that's what God does for us. Like he pulls us and draws us to himself by, I mean, you stop and you look at the cosmos, you look at nature, you look at how he is continuing to pull us and draw him to himself. And I'm excited for us to even hear about that today, of how he is drawing and pulling us closer and closer to him all the time. So I have one announcement for you, and then I want to read a leadership update for you. Next week, 2 weeks from now, October 10th, we're doing a baptism class. And so if you've ever considered baptism, wondered what it means, what does the church here feel about it? Like what does believers' baptism mean? If you have questions about that, I would encourage you, come be a part of our class. You can sign up online and join us there. And it's always one of my most favorite things that we do here is to have people in the tub and hear their testimonies, and it's a beautiful thing. Okay, most of you guys got this. I'm going to read part of it, and then I'm going to summarize another part of it here for you. And this is our last leadership update. And like I printed it, and it's like not black ink, it's gray ink, so I can barely read this. It's fantastic. So if I make some of it up, just humor me. Dear Chapel, this is from Zach and Chip Weisel and Zach Durr. Dear Chapel, thank you for your continued prayers and patience as we navigate the complex issues of this investigation and the difficulties our church leadership has faced. These past 5 months have revealed a situation that few anticipated, and while it has been painful, hard, and unsettling, we continue to see God work in powerful ways in our church and in many of the lives of our church family. We had no idea of the complexities that we would discover as a result of this investigation, and we realize that our work has, at times, left some of you frustrated and confused. Through this process, we have been made aware of ways in which the board's organizational oversight, past and present, should have been better. For this, we are truly sorry. We accept responsibility to restore the unity and well-being of the chapel. Our hope is that the forthcoming summary of findings, I'll talk about that in just a second, and town hall meetings will advance this process of healing and restoration. Pastor Mike Castelli. After extensive review and conversations with Pastor Mike, the Constitution Committee unanimously recommended to the trustees that Pastor Mike, in accordance with language outlined in the chapel's constitution, be fully restored to his role as lead pastor of the chapel, Green Campus. And the trustees responded by unanimously voting to affirm that recommendation. Pastor Mike agreed to return effective immediately. Pastor Mike writes the following. Man, you guys are killing my time here. That's okay. That's worth clapping about. Pastor Mike wrote the following. To the church and staff, I write that I am sorry for my role in this crisis. The organization was broken in many ways, and I too was in and part of that brokenness. With integrity, I attempted to lead with a clear conscience before God, yet I acknowledge that in doing so, my actions may have fostered feelings of misalignment with Tim's leadership and those who sought to lead with him. To that end, I am sorry. I look forward to the days of healing for the chapel body and staff. I look forward to a healthy governance structure, and I look forward to and will work towards a biblical unity that exemplifies Christ in all ways. And so I would say to you, hey, what does Mike need to apologize? And some of you guys have given me a hard time for apologizing too much too. And I would say that all of us, I think Jeff would echo the same thing. I know Joe would echo the same thing. The staff here in so many ways would echo the same thing. Like, we have been humbled and broken through this process in a way that we have realized that could we have done better? Yeah, we could have done better. Now, I don't know. Is that a big thing or a small thing? I don't know. But I know in the midst of all of this that I've looked out and I've gone, God, how can I do better in my work, in my church, in my home, in my job, in my school? How can I be who you want me to be? And so this has been one of those things that I think God, I think Mike is modeling and exemplifying for us what it means to be humble and to look and go, hey, we want to do this for the cause and for the sake of Christ. And that alone. And when it becomes anything else, then I am sorry. That's not right for us. So we are grateful for Pastor Mike and for this next step forward as we continue in our collective journey towards greater unity and stability as a church. And so here's what's going to happen next. Here's a timeline of things. Next Friday, you will receive the opportunity via email or on our website, the summary of findings. At that point, the website will be open back up where you can ask your questions. And then the following week, we'll have town hall meetings that will help to clarify those. And so hopefully that's a major step for us. I haven't seen the summary. I don't know what that looks like yet. I can't tell you much more beyond that, but I'm excited to begin to start this process of us healing together. As far as Mike goes, Pastor Mike, Tuesday he's going to re-engage staff. I mean, it does say effective immediately, so that means I am now retired as the lead pastor of the chapel in Green. Graciously handing that reign back over. He will re-engage staff on Tuesday, and then Wednesday from 4:30 to 7, if you would like, he's going to be here in the atrium. If you'd just like to come hug his neck and say welcome back, you're welcome to do that. He'll be back with us on the 3rd, and then on the 10th, he will be. You're going to have to put up with me in the pulpit next week, and then hopefully by the 10th he'll be back in the pulpit. And so he's eager to be here. even wanted to be here today, and so he's so funny. He's like, I'll just hang out in the atrium out back. And I'm like, Mike, if you do that, nobody's going to come in the room at all. They're all going to be out there with you. So, and so we're just, this happened very quickly for us, and we want to give, proper time for us to get to say welcome back to him and all of those things. Also understanding that like what we do here in this time is about that. It's about God, right? We got to focus our worship on that. So we want to move on from this stuff, right? And that's where we want to get to. So to that end, I mean, even next week, I know he's going to be back. You're going to want to hug his neck. Great, do it. But man, let's come with our hearts prepared to hear from God. And so we're excited for where we're going to go as a church. And so I would just ask you one more time, just the grace and mercy that God has extended to us in this time. And it's been a lot. Like he has extended a lot of grace and mercy to us. Let's continue to extend that to each other. And so let's continue to extend that to other campuses. Let's continue to extend that to other staff, other congregations. Let's continue to extend that grace and mercy to each other as we just trust God to continue to figure this thing out. So why don't you stand with me? We're going to worship together here in just a second. And Father, thank you so much for your grace and your mercy that just abounds more and more when us as human beings tend to get in the way and we tend to mess things up continually. So Lord, we thank you for all that you're doing in our church. We thank you for all that you're doing in our lives. And God, through this process, we thank you for being faithful to us. We thank you for being patient with us. And we thank you for where you're going to take us next and what that's going to look like. And so to that end, Father, we love you, we adore you, and we worship you.
Let the seas roar and all that fills it. Let the world rejoice and all who are in it. Let the rivers clap their hands and the mountains sing. Strike up the band, come usher in Jesus the King. Sing unto the Lord a new song for what he's done. He's made known to us his salvation. Make a joyful noise, all the earth. Bring forth the joyous song. Sing Moses and Aaron were before him. Samuel called upon his name, and he answered them through a cloud by day. What they knew by faith, we know by name. Jesus the King, sing unto the Lord a new song for what he's done. He's made known to us his salvation. Make a joyful noise, all the earth. Bring forth the joyous song. Sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing hallelujah, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing hallelujah, sing praise, sing sing hallelujah, sing unto the Lord a new song for what he's done. He's made known to us his salvation. Make a righteousness than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only trust in Jesus' name. Sing that again. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. Trust the sweetest Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide His face, we rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. My anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of Christ alone, Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. Christ alone, Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of He shall come with trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless stand before the throne.
God, what a pleasant thought for your church. The sound of the trumpet, us meeting you face to face, faultless, standing before you because of the blood of Jesus, because of forgiveness through Him. Thank you, God. Thank you.